It's Oscar season again. The nominees have been announced.
Do I like all of them? No. No.
And a lot of people are making their predictions and reflecting on the year's best films, so I thought, why not throw my own 2 cents in and casually talk about my favorite performances from last year? So, welcome to my top 10 list. It's in no particular order, crosses categories, and spoiler alert, doesn't include a ton of nominees. I haven't seen everything this year. I'll admit I'm woefully behind on international films, so I'd like to preface this video by saying this list isn't meant to be comprehensive or definitive. Exclusion should not be read as negativity or shade. If something isn't on here that you love, it's not necessarily because I didn't like it. Rather, this list is just a truncated summary of my own experiences and thoughts, intended to keep the conversation going about stories I enjoyed during a very strange year in film. So, let's keep those conversations going. Be sure to let me know in the comments what your favorite performances were last year and what you think of my list. Before we get to our first performer, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes that anyone can join. And later in this video, I'm going to tell you a bit more about how I use Skillshare and why clicking the link in the description below can make Skillshare work for you. The Nest tells the story of a family that moves from the United States to England in the 1980s, so the husband, played by Jude Law, can pursue some business opportunities. Not everything is as it seems with the family's finances, and as the reality of their situation bears down on them, secrets are revealed and their relationships begin to unravel. And what's fascinating about this film is that it maps this troubled family dynamic onto the visual vocabulary of a haunted house film. So while there isn't anything necessarily mystical or supernatural happening, it has the tension of a thriller or horror film. Carrie Coon, one of our most underrated actresses, suits this tone perfectly. She really has conquered the role of woman who shoulders mountains of stress and has to be stronger than the men around her. The Nest draws on that persona for the first half and then unleashes her and allows her to sort of glamorously rebel. It's quite stunning, like may we all be as loved as Carrie Coon was by the DP of this film. Director Sean Durkin filmed this sort of like a play. The shots are long, there are very few close-ups, so you feel like you're watching 2 characters on stage. Now, throughout her career, Carrie has shifted back and forth between stage and screen, never belonging exclusively to one or the other. So here she's really in her element, merging her strengths in both mediums. Her simmering tension with Jude Law in particular really makes me wish I'd have caught her in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf on Broadway. Fans of The Leftovers have been quietly rooting from the margins for Carrie Coon to make a giant mainstream splash for years, and The Nest isn't exactly that mainstream vehicle, but it does feel like a step in the right direction, and by that I mean a step toward Carrie Coon starring as the lead in everything all the time. To Five Bloods, Delroy Lindo plays Paul, a Trump-voting veteran who returns to Vietnam with the surviving members of his squadron in search of their fallen leader's remains and the buried treasure they left behind. This film reunites Lindo with director Spike Lee, with whom he worked on Malcolm X, Crooklyn, and Clockers. I imagine the strength of this performance is due in part to the freedom and trust born from years of fruitful collaborations between them.
He gives me elbow room. He gives me the space to investigate. If I'm inspired to say or do something in the moment, I always have the space with Spike to do it, as long as it is in service of the text, the story.
Every single person who has talked or written about this performance has mentioned Lindo's lengthy direct-to-camera monologue, and there's a reason why. It's rhythmic, poetic, very captivating, and in my opinion, might be the single strongest acting scene of this season. I love the pace of Lindo's speech. He takes breaks mid-sentence, pausing to hold you in suspense, to make sure that you really heard him and are absorbing every word. The performance is so much more than that scene, though. It's a chilling look at PTSD and feeling left behind by your country. Lee clearly outlines the injustice of asking Black Americans to die in Vietnam for a nation in which they're fighting for the basic rights of citizenship, and illustrates how different men dealt with that trauma, or, like Paul, didn't, and let it fester underneath the surface. As a big fan of The Good Fight, I've admired Lindo's consistent and extremely underrated work over the past few years, so I was really excited to see him in the awards conversation this year. Unfortunately, he didn't actually get a nomination. But regardless, I'm down for complimenting his work whenever possible. Minari tells the story of a Korean-American family that moves to Arkansas. They adjust to a rural way of life while the patriarch, Jacob, played by Stephen Yeun, dives headfirst into farming with a fervor that may threaten the stability of their family. It's nearly impossible to pick a favorite performance from Minari. The movie works in part because the entire ensemble is pulling their weight. Alan Kim is adorable, and I'm thrilled with Stephen Yeun and Ye Jung-yoon's Oscar nominations. But I want to throw some love Yeri Han's way for her performance as Monica. Her character is the glue that holds the family together. If she chooses to sever the bond, the family will collapse. That's a thankless role to play in real life, and it's also exactly the kind of role that tends to be overlooked in films, especially for women in a domestic setting. She's not the one who gets to have big dreams, she's not the one who gets the funniest lines, but there's an underlying and admirable tenacity to her that deserves attention. Monica soldiers on in a situation she doesn't particularly like, but she isn't made of steel. She can be vulnerable, she asks for help. Her power lies in understanding her limits, sometimes pushing through them, and sometimes drawing the line to preserve her own happiness. I loved the way Han approached this balancing act. Minari is a beautiful human story and a deeply important one for articulating one kind of Asian American experience. This is Han's first American film, and I'd love to see her in more if possible. In Sound of Metal, Riz Ahmed plays Ruben, a drummer who loses his hearing and must completely refigure his life to accommodate his deafness. Convinced he can, quote-unquote, fix himself, he enters a program run by Joe, played by Paul Raci, who teaches him about the deaf community and the values that tie it together. To me, Raci gives the perfect quintessential supporting performance here. He's not the lead masquerading as a featured player. He serves a very specific purpose in guiding and affecting Ruben's journey, and makes every single scene he's in count. As a child of deaf adults in real life, Raci has worked to incorporate ASL in his work as a performer for years, including at the Deaf West Theater in LA, and with his band where he translates the lyrics of songs. No wonder then that his performance feels like it grows from a place of genuine empathy and understanding. His patience and care for Ruben seem practiced, in the sense that he has been there, accustomed to translating for others or gently explaining the dignity of the deaf community. The conversations between Raci and Ahmed's characters are so breathtakingly honest, and stuck with me in a way I wasn't necessarily anticipating. To me, his monologues about the importance of being comfortable when alone and making an effort every day to be present with yourself took on a new meaning in 2020. Obviously, the challenges of quarantine are nothing like what Ruben was facing, but nonetheless, I felt so comforted just watching someone acknowledge that those are hard things to do and trying to lead someone else on a path toward a better life. As I said, I'm not ranking these performances, but if I were, this one would be near the top for me this year. In the 40-year-old version, Radha Blank plays a playwright who, on the eve of her 40th birthday, finds inspiration by reinventing herself as a rapper. It probably comes as no surprise that I enjoy films about creativity and art making. This film is one of the best contemporary representations I've seen of how an artist approaches compromise. How does a writer balance the desire to see her work produced, both from a financial and artistic perspective, with the possibility of having to sanitize her message for a mainstream, probably white audience? Does success require self-sabotage? Where does one draw the line? Blank's parodies of toothless woke aphorisms, racist reductions of character, and white power structures that treat stories by non-white artists as merely a trend ring so true. Her observations have urgency and candor that every single producer should listen to and absorb. As the director and writer of the 40-year-old version, this is Radha Blank's canvas to explore the tensions in these topics from start to finish. Every inch of this film is imbued with her sincerity and passion for creation. She's very funny, not to mention an incredible performer. Blank won the U.S. Dramatic Competition Directing Award at Sundance in 2020 for this film, her feature directing debut, by the way, and it has received subsequent attention from the National Board of Review, for example. But I've gotten the sense that this one is vastly more underseen than it should be, so if you haven't seen it, I hope you choose to check it out. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always stars Sidney Flanigan in her film debut as Autumn, a teenage girl in rural Pennsylvania who travels to New York City to have an abortion after an unintended pregnancy. This isn't an especially wordy script, so the success of this film really depends on what Flanigan can convey in glances and expressions. Thankfully, Flanigan easily communicates in that silence, and it's devastating. She's won a slew of critics awards for this performance, including the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actress and the National Board of Review Award for Breakthrough Artist. So it's not that this performance went unnoticed, it just never got enough traction to break into the Oscar conversation. I'm not exactly surprised that Oscar voters ignored an understated low-budget film about a teenager's abortion, but I hope it's the kind of film that, in retrospect, people will recognize as one of America's most insightful depictions of the lack of access to reproductive health care in the United States. Director Eliza Hittman weaves such gorgeous and often excruciating narratives that precisely detail how seemingly normal, everyday occurrences can feel earth-shattering. Meeting a stranger on a bus, rescheduling an appointment, running out of subway fare. This scene is the most harrowing sequence in the film, and yet it's also a routine exam that women go through every day. The questions are simple and straightforward, but having witnessed Autumn's grueling journey, they feel intimidating and almost existential. That Flanigan achieved such vulnerability on the first take speaks so highly of her sensitivity and openness as an actress. I'm so excited to see where she goes next. Judas and the Black Messiah documents the infiltration of the Black Panther Party in Chicago by FBI informant Bill O'Neill, played by Lakeith Stanfield. O'Neill's task is to get close to Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton, Daniel Kaluuya, and ultimately aid the Justice Department in his murder. I'll be honest, I don't typically love biopics. I get frustrated by how details are altered to cram a person's life into a 2-hour package, and often feel like they're about as informative as a quick skim of a Wikipedia page. I think Judas and the Black Messiah really succeeds as a film because it's framed not as a straight-up biopic, an awards-baity showcase of an actor's capacity for imitation, but as a genre film, more akin to something like The Departed. It also, somewhat uniquely for mainstream American films, sympathizes with the Black Panthers and leaves space to highlight the party's community work. Daniel Kaluuya has displayed such remarkable versatility in the last few years. In Get Out, his casting took advantage of the sweetness and sort of innocence his face can have. As Hampton, he brings that softness to his scenes with Dominique Fishback. But Kaluuya can just as easily appear domineering and intimidating, most obviously in Widows. You do not want to be on the other end of that stare. Fred Hampton doesn't have the same meanness, but he does require a similar sense of command, and that forceful energy is so enthralling in a political context. I find that when I watch speeches like this one in film, they tend to feel forced or flat, and are rarely convincing because the actor diverts attention from the people in the room and toward the camera, and you can generally tell if someone is trying to persuade someone they're not even looking at. Kaluuya truly feels grounded with that crowd, like he is personally reaching out to make connections with individuals. And scenes like this illustrate not only the organizing savvy of Fred Hampton, but also Kaluuya's power as an actor to captivate and entrance. In Black Bear, Aubrey Plaza plays Allison, a director who goes to a remote lake house in the Adirondack Mountains, seeking a bit of quiet to focus on writing her next film. The dynamic between her and the home's owners becomes increasingly awkward and hostile, and soon the group falls into a calculated game of desire, manipulation, and jealousy. To be honest, Black Bear isn't an easy film to describe. It's not straightforward at all. I'm not even sure that I understand it. But I think the fact that it is so amorphous has a lot to do with why Aubrey Plaza's performance is so memorable and interesting. This film kind of picks up where Ingrid Goes West and Legion left off in developing a dark, slightly disturbed underpinning to Plaza's persona. but it strips away her inherent playfulness and pushes her to the point of total emotional surrender. She really leaves it all on the floor here. One particular scene late in the film features a Jenna Rollindsian break that really stands out. It's especially impressive to me that she achieved this level of psychological decay the same year that she stole every scene in Happiest Season, a radically different film from Black Bear. She can do both. I truly believe that comedic actors turn out some of the best dramatic performances. See Lily Tomlin in Nashville, Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple, etc. And this is another great example of that. No one should ever be allowed to refer to Aubrey Plaza as just a deadpan comedic actress ever again. And I think if you've seen this, you'll agree. In Miss Juneteenth, Nicole Beharie plays Turquoise, a single mom and former beauty queen who encourages her rebellious daughter to participate in the Miss Juneteenth pageant herself, even though she clearly isn't into it. Similar to Sidney Flanigan's performance in Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Beharie's work as Turquoise largely relies on her skill with silence and expression. I'd like to pass the mic, so to speak, by quoting Angelica Jade Bastian's review of this film from Vulture. She summarizes what Beharie accomplishes here much more eloquently than I ever could, and generally speaking, her review offers a much more personal take on this film than I could offer, so I highly recommend checking it out, and I'll link it in the description. Here she is on how Beharie makes small moments pack a big punch. She's simply sitting on the porch steps of her home, her red dress glowing in the amber light, her Miss Juneteenth crown glinting atop her head, a cigarette in hand. There's no dialogue in this brief moment. Instead, Beharie shows us what we need to know. In the dip of her hand and the constitution of her face, we understand what's on Turquoise's mind: the hardships of being a single mother, the desperate yearning to give her daughter a different path than the one she's had to walk, and the neediness of reaching towards something more in life. Miss Juneteenth is full of moments such as this, which rely on the deftness of Channing Godfrey Peoples' direction and Beharie's performance to craft a simple yet beguiling portrait of Black life in Fort Worth, Texas. Miss Juneteenth is currently streaming on Kanopy, which is free with a library card, so don't miss it. Nomadland, the third feature from director Chloe Zhao, follows Fern, Frances McDormand, a woman who adopts a nomadic lifestyle, traveling, living in her van, and working seasonal jobs, after she loses her husband and the sole industry in her hometown shutters its doors. Using quote-unquote regular people, otherwise known as non-professional actors, to represent their own communities has become something of a trademark for Zhao. So when it was announced that she had a new film coming out starring Frances McDormand, I was really interested in seeing how adding a two-time Academy Award winner into the mix would go. Basically, I loved this collaboration. If any other actor had played Fern, we would be talking about how she de-glammed for the role. And cynically, I think a lot of us would assume this was done in an effort to garner awards attention. What's refreshing about Frances McDormand as an actor, and what makes her participation in this project so perfect, is that she really does not give a fuck about glamour or the pomp and circumstance of awards season. It's a testament to McDormand's rejection of celebrity culture, her unpretentiousness as an actor, and Zhao's empathetic instincts that this performance blends so seamlessly not only with non-professional actors, but also with a community that has its own idiosyncrasies and values.
Because a lot of times the non-professional actor might end up going off the arc of the scene because they felt like they should be talking about something and they're just being authentically themselves. Unless I think of an actor would end up imposing their moment anyways. What Fran is able to do is then shift in the moment, but yet still being completely present and stay in character with them. And that's the 24/7 job she did for 5 months.
Having watched a lot of interviews with the two of them, it seems like they really worked hard to make Fern a version of Fran, and that work is very evident in the openness and care and attention to detail she lends this role. So that's it. That's my top 10. Thank you so much for watching this video. Again, I'm curious to see what your top 10 are. Let me know in the comments. And let me know who you think is going to win Best Actress. I honestly have no idea, so I'm curious to hear what you think. Audio is one of the most important aspects of any YouTube channel, especially one like mine where I'm primarily selling my argument with my voice and not my totally incredible mug. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you probably know that my audio used to sound awful. Seriously, I can't even watch my old videos. I wanted to fix it, but as a self-taught editor, I just stared at this screen like, what does any of this even mean? A new mic definitely helped improve my audio quality, but so did taking the time to actually learn about the audio features Premiere Pro offers. So I took Thomas George's audio mixing class on Skillshare and learned a lot about levels, noise reduction, and compression. Now these graphs and numbers don't feel quite as mysterious, and I can do a lot more than just changing the gain and hoping that works. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. Premium membership gives you unlimited access, so you can join the classes and communities that are just right for you, whether you want to fuel your creativity, curiosity, or even career. Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving, especially when in-person classes and workshops aren't available, but you still want to use your time productively. The good news is Skillshare is incredibly affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. And because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. You're just one click away from unlocking tips and tricks that can improve your work. So be sure to check it out, and thanks again for watching.